So the race is on to replace Nicola Sturgeon as SNP leader after she resigned last week. I think it's fair to say the race is a bit of a car crash so far. We've got three leading candidates. We've got Ash Reagan, the former community secretary, Humza Yousaf, the health secretary, and Kate Forbes, the finance secretary. Tom, should we talk a bit about Kate Forbes first? Because she's been getting a lot of flack for her Christian beliefs.
No, it's really interesting, the way in which her candidacy has basically, at least in terms of how it's being talked about, it may well turn out to be true, I'm not sure, has eventually been sunk over the course of about 24, 48 hours because of the fact that the views that everyone basically knew that she already held, she chose to express them in public. So naturally, she's a evangelical Christian. She belongs to a very socially conservative Scottish church, has previously made pro-life statements, and she was essentially on maternity leave during the gender recognition row. Many people suspected that was, if not kind of orchestrated, then certainly very convenient. Because of the fact that she's obviously a high-ranking cabinet minister, but almost certainly wasn't going to vote for that legislation. During interviews this week, she made it clear that she wouldn't have. She also made clear that she wouldn't have voted for gay marriage, given the fact that she's an evangelical conservative Christian, and so believes that marriage is between a man and a woman. It's not really a big shocker. The response, again, hasn't been surprising, but has been pretty ridiculous. Not only have you had the kind of usual kind of figures in the liberal press, so this makes her unfit to be Scottish First Minister and to lead the SNP, even some of the people who backed her. So I think in the morning after she gave some of these interviews, about 5 of the SNP figures who had actually formally backed her pulled out. Apparently, her own campaign manager is actually going to step down at this particular point. And you just think this is so incredibly strange. First of all, because I think what we're seeing here, and we've seen other cases of this before that we might get into, is a kind of like reverse religious test now. Like if you happen to hold socially conservative religious views, it's now kind of established that should bar you from public office. People try and dress it up in different ways. She's not right to lead the SNP or whatever. But I really don't buy that, because of the fact that the reason the SNP exists is to get Scotland out of the United Kingdom. What that has to do with gay marriage, what that has to do with gender self-ID, what that has to do with children outside of wedlock makes no sense to me whatsoever. And whilst I think it's therefore quite likely that the SNP membership and faithful could turn against Kate Forbes because of all of this, I think they might be missing a bit of a trick, partly because her main competitor, Humza Yousaf, is a clown, and we might get into that, but also because of the fact that I think people do actually like people who have the courage of their convictions, even if they don't actually share those convictions. I think this kind of treatment of her is not going to endear people to the SNP, even if they are still quite unassailable in Scottish politics.
I mean, this is just, it is intolerant, isn't it? Let's be honest. Especially as she said, she doesn't want to bring these ideas to politics.
Yeah, I do think it is fair to say that, if you hold certain beliefs, in some sense, almost by definition, you'd be your politics would be shaped by that. But when people talk about unpopularity, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, the reason for her demise was pretty much one of the most unpopular policies in the last 10 years in Scotland, trying to get male rapists into female prisons. So in the context of popularity, in terms of ideas that are being pushed forward, I think they might be pretty even in that respect. But ultimately, I think it's for the SNP voters, and I think, as you rightfully mentioned, SNP is fundamentally about Scotland leaving the UK, and so it's neither a Liberal Party or a Conservative Party. It's what the particular membership at that time make it. But I think it's also just shown why the SNP has leaned so heavily into cultural issues over the last few years, whether that's green issues, trans issues, free speech, or general anti-Tory sentiment. Because beyond just the basic desire to leave the UK, there's nothing really holding them together. And so actually, it's quite hollow beyond that.
Well, clearly they don't agree on what they should do outside the UK. It's interesting, you touched on the green thing, even that has come up, which is interesting. Ash Reagan has said that she wants to delay net zero to save Scottish oil jobs. I think we should talk a bit more about Humza Yousaf. He's health secretary at the moment. He's thought to have not done a great job running the NHS, but perhaps he's someone we'll have discussed on this podcast previously for his role in the Hate Crime Act. This is the act which essentially sends people to prison, potentially for 7 years, for stirring up hatred, in its words, including in your own home.
Yeah, to me, when we talk about the SNP as a Liberal Party, I mean, that some of the policies they've tried to forward over the last 10 years have been some of the most illiberal policies that we've seen in Europe, let alone the UK. And the hate crime bill would criminalise people talking about race issues or gender issues that didn't conform to a particular progressive orthodoxy. And he was so comfortable with that. And I think it was quite interesting, Kemi Badenoch, in a podcast interview, she said that while she doesn't agree with Kate Forbes, she respects the fact and actually quite thinks it's a good thing that a politician would say what they think and not necessarily just say what they think will forward their political career. And I think that actually Humza Yousaf, I don't really believe a word that he says, because I don't know what reason he's saying that, because he's always just seemingly done whatever was the illiberal orthodoxy at a given time.
And he's definitely the sort of continuity Sturgeon figure, it seems. Whatever she wants, that's what has happened.
He's positioned himself as that quite explicit. I think he's even today, when we were recording this, Sturgeon all but kind of endorsed him, suggesting that whoever leads us should be, stick to our progressive agenda and so on. But it is funny, it's going back to the point you were making, Inaya, where it's like, we've got Humza Yousaf. He was actively campaigning to criminalise dinner table conversations. He wants to continue on with this policy of letting men into women's spaces and even prisons. He's also got a dreadful record as health secretary. There's actually quite a damning report which has been out today in terms of that. He got up in the Scottish Parliament not too long ago and was decrying the fact that all these different various kind of heads of industry or the judiciary were white. I mean, Scotland's a 96% white country. Are you that shocked?
We're going to watch this clip because people need to see it.
The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white.
That's the sane choice, the continuity.
Who's the nutcase here? The person who is religious and therefore has religious views. I mean, but this is what you end up with. But I think it's interesting.
That's another aspect, because people have not been grilling Humza Yousaf on his religious views because he's a practicing Muslim.
But he's a good example of how it's like you're allowed to be religious in public life, as long as you are basically the sort of Lib Dem version of that religion. Not to bring Tim Farron into this, but basically, if you're religious, but you don't, as long as you're not socially conservative, it's fine.
Spiritual,
it's fine. Magic FM and the Chilterns, as David Cameron used to say. That's all right.
But I just think he comes across really badly. I don't know if either of you saw this, but he fell over
on his little scooter.
And he got really angry at people on social media for taking the mick out of him. I'm like, can't you even laugh at yourself? I mean, it was quite funny.
There's videos
he would have wanted the Hate Crime Act to have been in place then, so he could lock people up.
There's videos of him arguing with nurses. This is the other thing where you think, one doesn't want to put too much of a premium on competence in politics or whatever. But I think this again shows how deranged the SNP have become by identity politics, because you've got, in the figure of Kate Forbes, she shoots to prominence because of the fact that her predecessor as finance minister quits on the day of the budget and gets loads of plaudits because of how good she was. Generally seen to be very competent in a brief and so on. Humza Yousaf, he's a bungling idiot, essentially. But he's all right because he believes that you can become a woman, Fraser, by clicking your fingertips. That's how far things have gone in relation to this. And even with Scottish independence, it's like, again, signalling the right views and all these modish cultural stuff is more important even than having a sane leader who might be able to actually win you back some support to get Scotland out of the Union, which is supposedly what it's supposed to be about. But
well, unlucky Scotland. Sorry.